All right, this evening we're trying another one of these broadcasts with another human being. See, I have friends. I have to travel long distance to find them, but there they are. And we're going to be talking about anarchy today. Uh, it's a word that obviously pops up a lot in culture. Uh, in some ways, I think some parts of society have a grasp on what it really is, and other people have some strange ideas about what it is, and some people have some idealized ideas of what it is. So we're going to explore it from kind of a historical, uh, a libertarian, and a little bit of looks from people who were traditional anarchists who called themselves anarchists on purpose. All right. So I guess, and feel free to throw questions at me at any point. I'm just kind of
Okay.
doing this thing. So, when did the concept of anarchy, or when did you like first hear the term, and what did it mean to you, and how is that, how is how is anarchy transformed as a definition as you've gone along through your life?
The first time probably was I heard the word was back when I was maybe my early teens,
Mm-hmm.
something like that. And of course, whenever the word was thrown around, it just meant chaos.
Mm-hmm.
You got visions of things like Mad Max and stuff like that.
Right.
Um, that was the very first time, and I think probably for a lot of people, that's exactly what they have in their head whenever they
Mm-hmm.
hear anarchy.
So
Um,
how has the word changed for you?
Uh, it actually changed. It really started changing probably almost 20 years ago. Um, when I when I first heard about libertarian thought, and this very minimalist government kind of thing, and after that, it actually sounded like far more positive. Actually, it is now more of a idea of, as Michael Malice put it, anarchy is a relationship, not a type of government.
Hmm.
It's just people voluntary relationships with one another.
Okay. Yeah, I know. I would have probably had the exact same view as you. My way, because I was a history nerd, so I knew roughly about the idea of anarchists and being the bomb throwing anarchists. Like there was definitely a anarchist influence on the assassin who killed the Archduke of Austria-Hungary, because that
Mm-hmm.
movement was still in full flux. So my association, I would thought of it as essentially violence and chaos, which most people would come on. And then I was just the right age to catch the tail end of the real punk movement. I literally caught it as it was dying and desperately tried to keep it going. But so the concept of anarchy was thrown amongst them people. And the funny thing is, in some of the lyrics, they're actually talking about the anarchy you're talking about. But at the time, I had no idea what they were actually trying to say. It's just okay, it's just punk gibberish. I have no idea what's going on. And then when I decided it was, I was I like dove into the deep end on the libertarian thing. 96, we ended up going to a convention after like 3 months of figuring out we were libertarians. And one of the things that happened was people, some guy got up to speak, and a bunch of people kind of started murmuring, and they said, he's an anarchist. And I'm like, ooh, ooh. And so I wasn't sure what to make of that. I said, oh, well, there's anarchists in this libertarian party. Huh. And then little by little, I started kind of learning the same things as you. It's like, oh, they're not all crazy, violent people. Some of them are just They said they want no government, and they're looking at this as the vehicle to get there. Okay, I get it. And then someone explained the difference between a minarchist and an anarchist, and I'm like, okay, this all fits now. Now it all comes together.
Uh, did you ever uh, hear the tapes? Uh, guys, I think the gosh, that's showing age. By Michael Cloud, Political Persuasion.
Yeah.
This was. I remember him talking about anarchy at the time. It was in some interview where somebody asked him, "Wouldn't you say that your position is basically anarchy?" And he said that he could have gone into a very educational type of thing and said, "Well, anarchy is a Greek word. It's a compound word, and meaning none, and archy meaning rulers." And but if I had gone that route, people would basically say, "Oh, he's a Greek bomb thrower." And I never thought, I never forgot that one. I thought it was pretty funny. Sorry, continue.
No. That I like that. Um, so where would you? No, I'll leave that one till later. I was going to ask you where you're at now, but I'll wait on that. Okay, so uh, we've been hearing so right now. I'd say probably most people who uh, have heard anything about anarchy are probably associating it loosely with Antifa at this point, because they do declare themselves. Yes, some of them overtly call themselves communists. Some of them say, no, we're anarchists. Uh, what are you thinking in terms of how the general populace is looking at them? Are they making those associations, or what would be your opinion? When someone hears Antifa, what kind of things are they linking if they're trying, if they were to link them philosophically rather than just link them with action?
Uh, I mean, when I talk to most people, and the subject of the Antifa comes out, they don't tend to actually use the word anarchy.
Mm.
They just view them as somewhat left wing extremists that are willing to use a certain amount of either violence against persons or property.
Yeah, I would agree that if anything, I hear people referring them more to being as communists than actual anarchists. Uh,
Yes.
and so I think they've branded themselves. I'm just curious if that, because, if the anarchy brand gets attached to them, I mean, obviously that's not going to move the idea of anarchy forward in any meaningful way. If they're looked as purely communists, I'm okay with that because, yeah, I'm not much on that being advanced either. So, how much do you know about the early linkage between anarchy and communism?
Well, from basically it was early to mid 19th century that I know of where the word actual anarchist was starting to be used. I'm trying to remember that. I actually I have a cheat sheet here. Uh, Pierre Joseph Proudhon, I think is how you pronounce the name,
Yeah.
might not have done so. He came up with the concept of mutualism, but he was one of the first people to actually say, "I'm an anarchist."
Okay.
What he was, though, is he was a socialist,
Okay.
and he liked the idea of socialism, but he didn't like the idea of a state-run socialism.
Okay.
So that's where he kind of went with that. It was, and he came up with this idea of mutualism, where wouldn't it be better if we took all of these socialist ideas and just made them all voluntary, where it's either individuals or groups of individuals all working together, but not having things like profit motives in the mix, and basically trying to get rid of markets, it would seem.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. So one of the things I know, and it's so painful to read anything Marx has written and actually try to put things together, because I mean the people who actually read Marx and try to interpret it, their writing is even more painful than his. I mean, it's not something. It's something you read it and you're going, "Wow, I know less than what I started with," because they're so hung up on all these buzzwords and terms. Would you say? Okay, so one of the things I can definitely say from looking at Marxist thought is that he cobbled together ideas from different people and lumped them into a single system. Uh, do you have any feel for whether he borrowed from Proudhon as well, or if they came from similar sources? Because the whole socialism, no government mix does kind of fit into how communism is supposed to evolve through its stages towards the end. Uh, the one place that Marx really gives his worst explanation of how that works. But I mean, do you have any idea, or do you have any thoughts on that, or even?
I don't know if he directly did it, but I mean, there seemed to be a general vibe in this area of early anarchy. Of you know something that I should say. Well, two things. One is you can't really talk about anarchy without noticing that there's a lot of anarcho dash
Yeah,
involved. There's anarcho socialist, anarcho syndicalist, and anarcho mutualist. It's just you know there's a lot of flavors, and all of the early flavors uh, were left wing.
mm-hmm.
And, and I should say that with that, uh, anarchists tend to left wing anarchists get very upset when anybody who still wants things like markets uh, attach themselves to the anarchist label. And I think they have a point because they were there first. On the other hand, they have a very nebulous view of property, so saying anarcho-capitalist doesn't bother me because
Mm-hmm.
you don't believe in intellectual property anyway. So,
Yeah, yeah, because see if I can remember exactly where I was going with that thought. Okay, so
with Marx,
yeah, so okay, so one of the things, a lot of people. I mean, obviously there are. Okay, so the one thing Marx probably did that was in terms of socialism, there were probably almost a dozen different schools of thought of how socialism might come about before Marx got his hands on it. And then
right?
when Marx branded socialism into his uh, communism, almost everybody said, "Oh well, that's one and the same. That they're practically synonyms." Now they carry forward, and there are forms of socialism that accept that property can exist, and there are forms of socialism that accept that money can exist.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes perfect sense that there's different flavors of anarchy that end up doing the same thing. So are you? Have you read anything, or has anyone in uh, Malice's collection talked about the big split that eventually would occur between the Marxists and the anarchists?
Uh, I really no. I don't know if there was any specific essays that talked about that. There were definitely different essays from different types of anarchists, but I can't remember if there were them talking specifically about Marx as a positive or a negative.
Okay.
So if you do know, I don't.
Well, I know kind of a general overview, but I don't know specifically what the author's mindsets were. The people who were the driving force on the thinking of it. Um, because on the first couple of internationals, the big international communist meetings that popped up, the anarchists were there in force. They were on the meeting floors. They were discussing things. They were trying to come things together. And just a little side note for people who haven't seen some of my earlier videos dealing with how uh, how you jigger the concepts of communism, socialism, and anarchy together. Uh, Marx was kind of thinking this idea of, okay, first we have a violent revolution and or civil war, but violent revolution's good, and it's a class based thing. And then second, you set up this dictatorship, and this dictatorship has absolute total control because it's the only way it's going to possibly work. Then you implement socialism, and socialism is just integrated into every little bit of life. And then uh, step four, government starts, or the central government starts disappearing in favor of the local communes running everything, and then all central government's basically gone. So
Right.
it's this last stage that attracts the anarchists. They're going, oh wow, yeah, that kind of sounds like what we have in mind here. So yeah, we'll get along for the ride.
Hmm.
But so the discussions, and again, this is where I had some small hope that you might know some of this, but that's okay. But so what happens
I'm
that?
not the smart one here.
Oh, well, then I don't know if the two of us add up to anything smart, but we'll see. But so in one of the internationals, the anarchists and the communists got into a big fight, and essentially the anarchists said, "Look, once you get to that dictatorship stage, you're never going to get out of it because it's human nature. No one's going to give that up. No one's going to surrender that part of that. No one's going to surrender the power." And so at that point, anarchists said, "We're done with the communists because we can't possibly get there." And so the bulk of anarchists, that's essentially at the point where where started becoming more violent because their initial thing was, oh, Marx has it down. He has the ideas. Let's follow him. And then when they came to the conclusion, like, nope, you don't have a plan to get out of the dictatorship. Everything you're just saying it's going to somehow, it's just going to magically happen. Step one, steal underpants. Step three, profit. It's not going to happen. And so they had a very visible breaking, and essentially the anarchists went their own way. Some of them obviously hung out because you don't disillusion everyone with a single argument. But so that's what broke the two groups apart in their most meaningful way. And I always find it kind of interesting that some of the modern communist anarchists and Marxist anarchists, uh, I'm wondering if they're even aware of that particular split happening and what their answer to that would be.
Well, the one thing that I could say that I know uh, was very powerful in the anarchist movement was there was a really big character in the anarchist movement, Emma Goldman,
Okay, I know the
and
name.
she um, she was around uh, back when Lenin came to be in Russia. Have you heard this story?
Maybe not. This part isn't ringing a bell, so enlighten me.
It's a really great story. So she was deported. She was deported to the Soviet Union, or what would become the Soviet Union, and because uh, basically she was a rabble rouser, and people were tired of her, and it was her and I believe her husband, or boyfriend at the time, were kicked out of the United States for being a nuisance, and they said, "You love this socialism stuff so much, why don't you go live there?" And so she was like, "Yeah, fine, sure, I'll go do this." And in a dazzling display of complete transparency and honesty, she she first went, of course, and she met Lenin, and she spoke to him, and she went around and she checked things out, and he's bragging about the socialist state that they're trying to bring forth, and she's like, she told Lenin, and to her credit, this is amazing. She told him off. She's like, "You're awful. What are you doing? You are. Where's the freedom of speech? Where's the freedom of free interaction between individuals? This isn't anything close to what we want." And he, said, "Wow, you're just being silly and foolish, and it's got to be this. It's got to be this dictatorship way, and everything." And she's like, "I don't hold with that." And so eventually, she came back to America and was wrote several essays bashing Lenin and bashing the upcoming Soviet Union, because she was like, "This is what's happening in Russia right now is awful. If you're an anarchist, don't believe the lies. They're saying this is what we want. This is nothing like what we want." So,
That's
so
awesome.
that
Well,
yeah,
good.
that might
Well,
have been one of the
absolutely
big
good on
flips.
her. Yeah,
Yeah,
I do. I have heard positive things on here, but I was not aware of that. So do you know roughly what time period she visited?
my gosh, I do
Was it
not.
after the Civil War had completely calmed down?
I believe so.
Okay,
I believe so.
so yeah, then they were pretty much out of excuses for explaining why it was a crap hole.
Yes. So that probably was the first thing, because of course Lenin did talk about how awesome Marx was. Um, so that's probably around. So that's I don't know exactly what date that would be.
Yeah, that would
But
be.
that's probably when it started happening, where the anarchists were like no, because they already were seeing that what was happening in Russia was not what was promised.
Mhm.
Anyhow,
Yeah, no, that's no, that's a really good add to this. Um, so just an opinion question. So obviously, okay, I guess the first one would be, yeah, let's start it at the other end. So one of the things that happens when Stalin is in charge of the Soviet Union is he starts running them through rapid industrialization.
mm-hmm.
And at least the overt reasoning he gives for doing that is that he said, okay, well, things aren't working here like we think. We're reading Marx, and the Marxian stuff isn't happening the way we're expecting it to. So he said, Marx says communism comes to a heavily industrialized society late, and then in late stage, they're able to start doing the transitions. Uh, in your opinion, do you think Stalin actually believed that, or was he just using Marx as an excuse to perform this? And it's just an opinion. I'm just curious because I always wonder about you look at what they say they're doing and what did they really want. Do
I
you
don't
think?
know, little column A, little column B.
Yeah. Well, because
Like I think I
I'd
think
look
they
at
had some.
everyone, Khrushchev and beyond. It's pretty clear that none of them had any belief this was ever going to end up where it was supposed to. I mean, maybe worst case, they might be thinking, well, maybe if communism spreads to the whole world, then we can somehow make it work here. But you don't really get the feeling
I think
that.
I lost you.
I see a gap. Let's see.
Yeah,
Are you
just
there?
lost you for a second. Yep.
Okay.
So Khrushchev
Yeah. So
thinking
Khrushchev, uh, I'd say he pretty much had no. If he wanted to get there, he had no idea how to get there, and he just pretty much ran things the way they were. I mean, he liberalized things. He made it not as horrible to live there as Stalin did, but he didn't really do anything that seemed to be advancing communism to some form of late stage anarchy. Do you think Stalin had any inkling that maybe he could actually get things heading in that direction? Or do you think that was just cover for something else he wanted to do in terms of industrialization?
I don't. I'm
It's just
as
just a
long as
guess.
if he was somewhat realistic, there's just no way he could think that anywhere in his lifetime he was going to get anywhere close to this. because it wasn't happening.
Hmm.
Uh, it would take, and I don't think he was self-deluded to that degree.
Yeah,
You
I get
know,
the feeling that he was the most scary realist on the face of the planet. That yeah, here's reality. I see it exactly this way, and yeah, I will shape reality in the little ways that I do. Okay, so a step further back, what about Lenin? Do you think he actually thought they could, that late stage communism was something he thought they could actually achieve?
I mean, he might have had some belief in it early on. I don't know. I mean, I think he probably liked these ideas better than Stalin did.
Yeah,
But I mean, not that Lenin was great. Lenin was not a great guy.
yeah.
So no, so maybe he believed in it a bit, but again, I don't think that. Yeah, maybe a bit more, 10-15% more than
Yeah,
Stalin, but that's about it.
yeah. I agree. I think because he did actually, for a brief time period, abolish money. And
Yes, and that went horrid.
yeah, that's the period where they went into their absolute famine because all of a sudden they realized. Well, I don't know if they realized it, but as a side effect of not being able to price anything, uh, yeah, they basically had a self imposed famine, and that may have been where he lost faith, or maybe thought it was going to take a lot longer, or whatever he came to, because uh, he the response to the famine, of course, was they did like mini privatizations where they allowed uh, farmers to do a certain amount of their acreage as you grow it and you do what you want with it rather than it getting collectivized, just so food would actually show up someplace in the market. So then, so here's the big question: did Marx believe it? Okay? If you read anything of Marx, okay, incredible in-depth stuff going on about the classes and how the revolution's going to come about, and industrialized society and all these different concepts of how the class comes together, and here's what the dictatorship looks like, and here's what socialism looks like, and then in the end it'll be anarchy. Bye. It's like nothing. There's literally nothing about the end stage other than somehow someday somewhere we're going to get there. So
Step three, profit.
yeah, step three, profit. So I'm almost wondering if he deliberately threw that in there as a way to suck anarchists in. If it was like, okay, I don't really necessarily believe it. Well, I'm a, like any good socialist, a socialist goes, well, once we get to total socialism, everything's going to be working so well that all the people who are fighting us going along the way are going to say, oh, geez, you're right, because yeah, we're in utopia now. So I'm wondering if maybe that's what he was thinking, is once they got to socialism, it would be so utopian that the anarchists would say, oh, okay, yeah, this is a good enough place to stop. So I'm wondering if his idea of the end commune system, the anarchy, was just something he fabricated in order to increase his base.
I maybe, but maybe I also think it's just as possible that he was just like, oh yeah, utopia at the end.
Yeah,
People like to predict that and say,
yeah,
no, if you disagree with me on all of my suppositions about how the world works, then we can get to a place where there's rainbows and puppies.
uh, see, I'm trying to make Marx a scheming bastard, and you're trying to steal that from me. But okay, okay, all right. So let's move away from this awful tasting, smelling dish we call communism.
Mhm.
So when the anarchist movement slips away from communism and starts going through its violent stages, are you aware, in terms of what you've read, were there people who were speaking out against the violence? Because essentially the idea was, I mean, it was almost a childlike approach to anarchism, where it's like, huh, it kind of reminds me of my son when he was about 4. Huh, government's bad. We should kill government. And so you basically got guys making bombs and lobbing them into cars, thinking, okay, if I take the leader out, the government's going to totter, collapse, and boom, anarchy. I mean, that was one thought process going on. Are you aware of people during that particular time period who were saying, "Oh, no, 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 you guys are that you're not bringing us in the right direction"? Or
Um,
or do you know more people who are saying, "Yeah, this is a good idea"?
I, the during the bomb throwing times, I mean, what seemed to be happening mostly is anarchists were infiltrating unions.
Mm.
Different types of trade unions. That's what was his name? Was it Joseph Ling? I can't remember. Um, he was the guy that famously was in court because of bomb throwing, and one of the most amazing lines I've ever heard from a court transcript was, "I couldn't have possibly thrown that bomb. I was at home making bombs." Uh,
And yes, I will probably steal that meme for the thumb for this, just so you know.
yeah, oh, good, good. No, that's cool. So yeah, there was a lot of that going on, especially with a lot of the bomb throwing going on in Chicago. It was uh, basically anarchists coming in, uh, trying to get in good with the unions, and there was a lot of union people that were going with it because they had just general hatred, and the anarchists saying, "Hey, if you go our way, this is all ours. We can." Uh, but you're right; it was really kind of weak. It was just, we'll just destroy some property and kill enough people, and maybe it'll all work out in our favor. I didn't see a whole lot of people at that time that were writing serious, persuasive essays. That you have to get to somebody further on down the road like Goldman,
Mm-hmm.
who starts writing things like, "This is why we should do this." Um, Still very much from a left wing kind of socialist perspective, but yeah, it was definitely your kid's viewpoint, I think.
Okay. So this is something I don't know. Actually, I might do enough research to come up with a whole video on this particular topic. Are you familiar with uh, anarchist Ukraine?
No,
And I
what is
want to
it?
call the video "Anarchy in the Ukraine." Okay, so weird stuff. So
Sure.
when end of World War One's coming up, and the Russians are starting to collapse, and the Russians eventually just say, "Crap, we got to, in order to get everything together, we got to kind of fall back in our own borders, and we got to just kind of leave things on their own." And that's when the revolution breaks out in Russia. Revolution breaks out in Ukraine as well.
Hmm.
Ukraine actually had an area about a quarter to the size of the country that declared itself an anarchy. And they actually had anarchist committees and anarchist militias trying to set up some form of voluntarist associations to actually get things running. Uh, I'll be really interested to find out if there's enough detail about it to actually make it interesting, because the stuff I've read so far is fairly sketchy. But so essentially, what happened is for a brief time, they started taking over areas. They started doing things like stripping land from the church and stripping land from the government and excessively large landholders in their mindset. And then letting people just go work them. Instead of like the communists who went out and, oh, we're going to collectivize and we're going to force people over. They said, okay, the land's yours, have fun. And apparently they didn't starve. Now, Ukraine is rich ground. It always has been, so it'd be harder to starve there than any place else. But the fact that there's no famine associated with them setting up tells me they might have almost been doing things right. Now, the one thing that comes out of it that's kind of funny is initially they tried to ban money. And then they realized, no, 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 no. Banning money, that's counter. If people want to use money, that's up to them. We're not going to stop them from using money. And so they started printing up their own script. And the script specifically said you are free to counterfeit it. And so,
Wow.
so people were using Russian Tsarist money. They were using Reich marks. They were using local currencies. They were using up things they were printing up. All kinds of any kind of paperwork they could come up with and say, okay, this is tradable. And that resulted in a hyperinflation. So, but still, I don't see anything indicating in the history that actual starvation occurred. And so this anarchist area, initially, what happened was is at the end of the war, the Russians were supposed to get out of the war as far as the Germans were concerned. They violated the truce, so the Germans marched all the way into Ukraine. And so they occupied the areas with the anarchists. The anarchists started basically disobeying and causing problems. And eventually the Germans had to pull out because they had bigger problems in France. And then they basically went through several cycles of, so like the white Russians came rolling through there and they're like, oh, we don't want to cooperate with these guys. We'll cooperate with the Red Army in order to get these guys out. And once they got them out, they're like, holy crap, we don't want the Red Army here. We'll cooperate with the White Army to get. So they kind of played back and forth. So there were like phases where they ran for several months as an anarchy, were occupied by an outside party, ran several months again as an anarchy, and then were occupied again. But it sounds interesting, if nothing else. So they didn't abolish all property. They had a weird, essentially they had kind of a Lockean view of the land where it's like, if you're working it, it's yours.
Okay.
And they believed that your personal possessions were yours. If you made it with your hands, it's yours. Or if you fairly traded for it or whatever. So they didn't go as far off the deep end as the commies did.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, I would like to know more about it. Please do a whole video on that.
Yeah, I'll see what I can dig up on it.
I do want to know more about that.
Somebody out there has a big, thick, boring book on it. I'm absolutely sure on it, and that might be actually worth blowing the dust off of and ruining my eyes a little bit further.
Fascinating. No, I did not know.
Okay, so let's get into our more modern anarchism, where we have the peaceful, and if you would qualify it as more rightist, feel free. So,
well, I think one of the earlier ones we could talk about, like Rothbard and anarcho capitalism, but also before that, I guess agorism, which I guess is not really a type of anarchism as much as it is a tactic.
Okay,
I would say more.
Okay, define that, please.
Okay, so
not tactic, agorism.
Yeah. Agorism was from a guy named Samuel Konkin. Samuel Konkin III. In the mid-70s. And what he was proposing, he was an anarchist, and he actually was more from a left leaning type. Yeah, he would describe himself that way. But he believed that markets were really great. And he believed that one of the things that would be good in destroying a state would be what he called counter economics. It was the whole basis of agorism, which basically means you participate in markets in a way that the state has no jurisdiction over it.
Mm.
You make your income under the table. He had actually, and I thought this was really great. He divided the markets into three parts. He talked about the white markets, and he goes, these are things that, or these are state-approved markets, but also just general. Even if the state can't do anything about you paying cash for apples at the farmer's market, that would be a white market. No one cares, and you can just go about your business. These white markets are fine. Just try and not, buy it at the farmer's market. Don't get taxes involved. Don't give them money. The second would be black markets. These are state non-approved things. This is things like drug deals and such. Very much what was happening on the Silk Road. If anybody wants to know about Silk Road, we go into that at some other time.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just basically a platform that allowed you to buy things that the state doesn't approve of.
Okay.
And of course, since the state doesn't approve of it, they don't get a cut. And the final thing, though, the final market that he talked about, he called red markets. He said, red markets are things that agorists do not participate in because those markets harm people. So things like hiring a hitman.
Okay.
Things like that. So, and the idea is quite nice, and I don't think that there's any chance of people just buying apples at the farmer's market is going to do any real damage to a state, especially a state like we have.
Mm-hmm.
But I also don't see any harm in it. It's but it's more of a tactic than a actual end goal for anarchism.
And agora, so they're borrowing from the Greek there, the marketplace.
Yeah, just the marketplace. And he was brought under fire quite a bit from more OG anarchists because they're like markets.
Well, I mean, at least it's a realistic point of view. At least, I mean, they're there. You're not going to suddenly make them disappear. So, I mean, there is a logic there of recognizing their existence and trying to use what's there against it. So, yeah, okay, I can dig it. Okay, that's an interesting take. So, Rothbard.
Yeah, I think he was the one that coined
I'm pretty sure.
The phrase
I'm pretty sure.
Anarcho-capitalism. Although to go back to my previous point, Rothbard actually said, we're not anarchists. Like, he goes, I'm using this term, but one of the biggest distinctions, I think, between anarcho-capitalism and the anarchist movement broadly is that anarchists tend to believe that all hierarchies are largely bad things.
Okay.
And when you believe in markets, that's almost an impossibility. There's going to arise a hierarchy because some people are better at doing things than others. There's just no way around it. But to Rothbard's point, it's correct. Just because we're using the only two things that really match up between anarchists and anarcho-capitalists are the fact that they say we shouldn't have a state. There should be no government whatsoever. But past that, there's really few similarities.
Okay. I have not read as much Rothbard as I should. I mean, I've read, let's see. I've read his book on progressivism, which is really good. Solid stuff. I mean, it's a lot of stuff you would not. He found a lot of stuff you would not expect were out there because it's literally ignored by all historians. So that's a pretty good book. But so, do you have any idea about his progression in thought, how he got to where he was, or have you just kind of jumped in the same way I have, where you?
I kind of looked specifically, like, when his viewpoints on anarchy, and not how he got there. I think actually, it goes back to kind of an old joke, the difference between a minarchist and an anarchist is kind of like having an exterminator come to your house, and the anarchist blows all of them away, and the minarchist says, well, you need to have a little bit of roaches. So,
Mhm.
and I think that's probably Rothbard's like going, well, eventually we get rid of all the roaches, couldn't we? Maybe.
Yeah, but then
There's no
you
reason
wouldn't
for
have a business as an exterminator.
it.
That's why you leave a few of them behind.
Yes, of course. You're a bad exterminator. Yes, that's exactly what you do.
Okay.
So yeah,
So, how much in terms of anarcho-capitalist as a movement, you think, do they are they specifically differentiating themselves from libertarians in terms of an outlook, or is it just a cool rebel flag to be waving around?
I think that most people that define themselves as anarcho-capitalists are saying this is the ideal,
Okay.
but this is not the pragmatic. They're pragmatically libertarian, and they're pie in the sky anarcho-capitalists.
Okay.
It's the way I look at it. Almost everybody that I've met in those circles is pragmatically libertarian.
Okay. So here's a question. Get into you a little. You know what I mean. So where do you think you fall in the minarchist anarchist scale, if there were one? Where are you leaning, you think, based on where you're at right now? Yeah,
Oh,
towards the middle, or much closer to one or the other?
I'm whew. That's an interesting thing. It's like, well, are you asking me how do I believe the world works,
Nope, I'm
or what would
asking
I like to happen?
just you, just you.
Because if you ask me what I would like to happen, of course, I would like to have a world where exchanges are all voluntary, where there isn't coercion, and where there is coercion, that is considered culturally unacceptable, and you can push back on those sort of things at whatever level that seems appropriate. Um, so that's I would be more or less, I guess, anarchist, or probably a better word would voluntarist
Mm-hmm.
kind of society. I don't believe that's how things work at all.
Yeah. So, would you? Is there a huge differentiation in your mind between a voluntarist and an anarchist?
The distinction is primarily just labeling, man. The distinction is that I don't want to be called a Greek bomb thrower.
Okay.
It's much, people go, oh, what is that when you say voluntarist?
It is a good little word. I mean, it's immediately embraceable. It sounds good. I mean, even if you don't have the slightest clue what it is, you might think, "Oh, I like to volunteer," or I really should. I don't at all, but I should. I could see that. I'm a bit of a volunteerist myself, but So, would you say the volunteerist label is more of a right thing versus left? Is it a way to
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I was thinking it might be that's a way to embrace the idea while distancing yourself from that particular ideology. Okay, I like it. All right, let's see. So, um, you uh, have you got into? I know I don't want to get too far in on the any of the new right stuff yet. Maybe we could do that for a future one.
Okay.
But I'm kind of curious on in terms of voluntarist viewpoints how we see societal order come up in terms of like okay once you start stripping away the upper layers of government how do people start organizing at that point? I'll give you a kind of interesting story my son gave me. Uh, he uh, he works near a hobo camp.
Okay.
Can I say that anymore? I don't know. But anyway, so
I don't care.
yeah, hobos. So one of the things he noted, because every once in a while some of them come over his way and end up saying stuff to him, and apparently, so basically it's a big tent city in the woods, kind of near an industrial area. And one of the things that happened was several of the people just basically decided they're enforcers and they walk around with chunks of wood and pipe, and they're doing apparent. I'm not going to say for sure how much what kind of justice they're meting out, but apparently their big thing is just walking around making sure people aren't like beating up each other, and so they'll just break up people beating up each other.
Okay. Sounds
Now,
reasonable.
mind you, that I don't know if they're taking their cut of things, like where they're like, okay, well, for the service I provided you, I will relieve you of that small baggie there. But anyway, so and I was pointing out, I said, well, humans have a tendency when you throw a group down, they start coming up with some form of organization. It's just their natural way of doing things. So if you start stripping the upper layers of government, uh, would how much local government is a voluntarist willing to tolerate?
Um, well, apparently a lot. Because there's a lot of Americans that fall under that label. Um, and so, and they might complain about it and not like it, but they're not trying to leave either. Um, the the idea that uh, people wouldn't need some type of security in a voluntarist society is crazy.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to happen. There's going to be bad actors. Uh, so I as long as we are agreeing that yes, you are the people that come around with the pipes
Mm-hmm.
to do things, and you're not just going around being a mafia source.
Right.
The volunteers would be pretty fine with that, I would think. It's we there probably should be a podcast on culture
Mm.
because I think there is an important aspect to that what like Marx was talking about. We have to do all this crazy stuff so we can break people down and make people into the new man. And I don't think that those tactics will ever work, but I do think that you would have to have common cultures if you're going to have a volunteer society working.
Mm. I would definitely
Yeah,
agree.
we agree, kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess to a certain extent, if you get rid of some of the top levels of government, or at least make them a lot more anemic than they are now, that gives essentially the force of homogenization starts going away and gives the potential that localities could come up with distinct cultures. And if you're in the one you don't want to be in, you just say, okay, well, I'm going to up and move over to this other group if they're willing to, have us in their area. So, yeah,
Yeah.
I could see where you could get a lot of variety of cultures out of that. Because it's really government that's really causing the different variances in culture not to occur. And I mean, unless of course they're driving some very interesting cultural changes at the moment, but yeah, that's an experiment that's still playing out.
Well, there's, what do you want to be into? Like, I don't want to be Amish,
Mm-hmm.
but there are clearly people that do want to be Amish. They do want to have that lifestyle. They want to live in that culture, and they are perfectly willing to live with the restrictions of that. So I don't think that it's impossible,
Mm-hmm.
um, at least on a small scale. What we are seeing is that the idea of this land mass and this and this amount of people trying to be all governed in some similar way, this kind of base common morality, it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
It's not working clearly,
Oh yeah.
and hasn't done so for quite some time.
Okay.
It worked out better when we just had horses, because then people could do that.
This is true.
You know,
Well, and then obviously, some time back, I mean, not only did each state have its own character, but the sub-regions of the states had their own characters as well. Where you could have a community area where everybody uh, had at least similar enough beliefs where that it would work out. Now, obviously, if you were the total odd man out, it sucked to be there. But that's the case always. I mean, wherever you're the odd man out, it's not a good place to be. But as long as you can freely move around, uh, one would
mhm.
think you'd eventually find your community.
Yeah. So in a nutshell, I would say volunteers will go to the level of government, or or structure or
Governance.
hierarchy. Yeah, whatever is their liking to the culture that they want to be in, or close as they can get.
Okay. All
I'm sure
right.
there's volunteers that want to be, live in an Orthodox community or a Catholic community or a Muslim community or whatever.
Mm-hmm. That would be an interesting conversation too. Okay. Well, I think we got the bare bones of this laid out. I think somebody who hasn't really heard of anarchy before has a starting point. Do you have anything you want to add to that? Any ideas that we didn't cover?
I would like to have one of the more interesting types of anarchy is egoism,
Say that again.
which was egoism. I
So
don't know if you
EGO.
EGO.
Okay.
Yeah. So I would like to just have this quote by Max Stirner. He wrote in 1884 this essay, Ego and Its Own. Egoism is interesting. It is a type of anarchism which they have no concept of rights whatsoever.
Mm.
And uh, he sounded kind of like a lunatic. And to give his one of his quotes, "What I have in my power, that is my own. So long as I assert myself as holder, I am the proprietor of the thing. Whoever knows how to take, to defend the thing, to him belongs the property."
Mm.
So they're not all, Puppies and Rainbows,
Yeah.
Anarchy.
Well, and yeah, I mean, ultimately, at that level, there's going to be a lot of sorting, and there are going to be problems. I mean, we even saw stuff like that, in the American West, before
Oh yeah.
the federal government was able to work its way out there, where all of a sudden, somebody, the various county wars that broke out, where two major groups in a county were like, no, we're going to run things this, we're going to run sheep, no, we're going to run cows, and it's like, well, I guess we're going to have to fight about over this, and they literally, by the way, that's actually accurate. That's not the
Oh yeah.
okay. I didn't know if you knew that it was sheep and cow wars.
Well, I mean, like during the gold rush,
Mm-hmm.
I think it was Seattle that was mostly run by the brothels.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
they had all the money.
Yeah. So yeah, so there'll be some interesting shakeouts if we ever get to that point. But the nice thing is yeah, you could theoretically, and it'd be a lot easier for us to pack up and leave than it was them. Because I mean,
Yeah.
really, you get your horse and wagon and everything you own and haul it out there, and then you decide, oh wow, this isn't working out because these two groups are going to war with each other. You're kind of hosed because you've got so much sunk cost at that point. You're like, well, I guess this is worth dying for.
Gosh, what a terrible place to be in.
So, but now, I mean, we could just say, okay, well, so let's see, all the crap that is replaceable, I'm just going to sell here for as cheap as possible. I'm going to sell my place, get out, hop in the car, rent a moving van, and go over to this other community that sounds like they've got their stuff together. So yeah, I don't see, because obviously people will invoke the Wild West as the big example of where anarchy breaks down. That's kind of a funny thing to think, anarchy breaking down. But anyways, so
This broke down into government. Oh my
yeah.
God.
But the thing is the like so many different things that have come up, because it didn't work then very well doesn't mean it can't work now if the circumstances were right. Okay, so I think this covers what we need to cover. So I really appreciate you sitting in tonight. You filled in a lot of the material, and I really want to read. It's the Anarchist Handbook, right?
Yes,
Yes.
I highly recommend it. The Anarchist Handbook by Michael Malice. For people that aren't into reading it, it is also on Audible.
Mm-hmm.
And a fun part of it is he got a different person to read each essay.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a little bit of variety there.
Yeah. So it's my goal to get it. But the fact that you've read some of it, that you did some of the heavy lifting tonight. So I really appreciate that. And look forward to doing this again with you sometime.
Sounds excellent.
All right. Thanks.